Ukoja was a small village, quiet and peaceful, hidden in the hills of the Ife kingdom. The people there lived simple lives, farming, fetching water, and sitting together in the evenings to gist. Everybody knew everybody in Ukoja, and news traveled fast. If something happened to one person by the next morning, the whole village would hear about it. But lately, fear had settled over the village. For some months now, young women were being found dead, one after the other. Nobody knew what was killing them, but one thing was always the same: the strange marks on their necks. They looked like snake bites, but nobody could say for sure. No one had ever seen a snake around the women when they died. It was as if the deaths were happening in secret, and that made it even more frightening. The village chief, Chief Obi, sent hunters into the bush to find the snake, but they came back empty-handed. The deaths didn't stop, and the fear only grew stronger. Mothers started warning their daughters not to move around at night. Even in the daytime, women no longer felt safe. The once lively village became quiet, and people didn't trust as easily as before. But there was one person who didn't seem to care about all the fear. His name was Chima. If you asked any woman in Ukoja who the finest man in the village was, the answer was always Chima. Tall, with a muscular body that showed all the hard work he did as a builder, his skin was smooth and dark, and his eyes shone like he always knew something you didn't. His smile alone was enough to make a woman weak. Chima had the kind of charm that made women forget their fears. When he walked through the village, the women would giggle and blush, hoping he would look their way. And when he did, it felt like the sun was shining only on them. Chima knew how to use his looks and sweet words. It wasn't just his fine face, it was the way he spoke, the way he moved, and the way he always seemed to be in control. He could make a woman feel like the only person in the world. But behind all that charm and beauty, Chima carried a dangerous secret. He didn't care about the fear in the village. He didn't worry about the deaths either. He went about his day as if all was well and good. Chima knew he was handsome, and he didn't hide it. He walked around the village with confidence, his head held high, and his eyes always searching for his next catch. The women of Ukoja were drawn to him like ants to sugar. Whether at the village well, the market, or on the farm, as long as Chima was nearby, the women couldn't take their eyes off him. But it wasn't just about his looks. Chima had a way of talking that made any woman feel special. He knew the right things to say at the right time. His voice was deep and smooth, like the calm before a storm, and he always knew how to make a woman smile, even when she was feeling down. He didn't need to rush. Chima took his time, slowly drawing them in, making them trust him, making them want him. If he wanted a woman, he would get her. All it took was one charming smile, a few sweet words, and before long she was his. And once he had her, he would take her to his hut at the edge of the village, away from prying eyes. There, under the soft glow of the moon, Chima would work his magic. He was gentle, patient, making each woman feel like she was the most important person in the world. But when the night grew darker, Chima would always ask the same strange question. Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake? The women never knew what to say. They would laugh, thinking it was a joke. But before they could answer, Chima would whistle, a soft, eerie sound that seemed to float in the air. The women would feel uneasy, like something was about to happen. And that's when it did. Something would shift in the room, and before they could react, they would feel a cold, smooth touch on their skin. A snake, dark and dangerous, would slither out from Chima's trousers. The women always froze, their fear too strong to scream or run. The snake would wrap itself around them, slowly, as if toying with its prey. Then, with a quick strike, it would bite them on the neck. The bite was always the same. 2 sharp marks, like fangs sinking deep into their skin. The venom would spread quickly. The women would gasp, their bodies shaking as the poison took hold. Within minutes, it was over. They were dead, and Chima was left standing over their lifeless bodies, his face expressionless. By morning, the woman's body would be found in the village square, cold and pale, with the strange bite marks on her neck. The villagers would gather around, shaking their heads, wondering what kind of snake could do such a thing. But no one ever suspected Chima. He was too handsome, too charming, too perfect. Each time another woman died, the fear in the village grew. But Chima didn't care. He continued his life as if nothing was happening. The women still blushed and giggled when he walked by, completely unaware of the danger that lurked beneath his good looks and sweet words. Life in Ukoja went on, even with the fear hanging over the village. The women were more cautious, especially at night, but the daily routine of fetching water, farming and trading continued. Every time a woman died, people would mourn, but nobody had any answers. The village chief, Obi, tried to keep the people calm, but deep down, everyone knew that something was wrong, and it wasn't just a normal snake causing these deaths. Then one day, a new face appeared in the village, a woman named Adana. She was different from the other women in Ukoja. Tall and graceful, with skin that shone like polished wood, Adana carried herself with confidence. Her beauty wasn't just in her face or body, but in the way she moved, as if she wasn't bothered by anything around her. She had come to visit her aunt, who lived on the edge of the village, and almost immediately, she caught Chima's attention. Chima noticed Adana the first time he saw her at the well. Unlike the other women, who couldn't help but stare at him or blush when he passed by, Adana didn't seem impressed. She didn't giggle, she didn't stare, she didn't even smile at him. Instead, she looked straight past him, her face calm, like she was in control of everything. This intrigued Chima. He wasn't used to being ignored, and Adana's calmness felt like a challenge to him. He had always been able to win over any woman he wanted, and he wasn't about to let Adana be the first one to resist him. From that moment, Chima decided that he had to have her. Chima began to watch Adana more closely. He noticed that she was always polite, but never too friendly. She spoke kindly to people, but she never allowed anyone to get too close to her. This only made Chima want her more. He wasn't just interested in her beauty, he was fascinated by her mystery, by her strength. The more he watched her, the more determined he became. Chima wasn't used to failing, and he wasn't about to start now. He began to follow Adana, looking for opportunities to speak with her, to charm her like he had done with so many others. But each time he approached her, Adana kept her distance, as if she knew something that he didn't. One afternoon, Chima found his chance. Adana was at the well, filling her water pot, and there were fewer people around. Chima walked up to her, his usual confident smile on his face. "Adana," he said smoothly, his voice deep and sweet like honey. "Let me help you carry that." Adana glanced at him, her face expressionless. She didn't look impressed by his looks or his charm, and this only made Chima more eager. He waited for her to giggle or blush like the others, but instead she simply nodded. "If you insist," she said calmly, stepping back to let him take the pot. Chima felt a small victory. He lifted the pot easily and placed it on his head, making sure to show off his strength. As they walked to her aunt's house, Chima tried to make small talk, but Adana remained quiet. She answered his questions politely but didn't give him any more than necessary. This wasn't what Chima was used to, but he told himself it was only a matter of time before she fell for him. All the women eventually did. She is only playing hard to get. He just had to work a little harder with this one. After that day at the well, Chima couldn't get Adana out of his mind. She wasn't like the other women of Ukoja. Most of them would have melted under his smile, giggling and blushing, but not Adana. She was different. The more distant she remained, the more obsessed Chima became. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to a woman not giving him the attention he was used to. It was new. It was frustrating, and it made him want her even more. Chima had always been able to get any woman he wanted with little effort. Just a flash of his smile, a few smooth words, and the women of Ukoja were his. They were all the same, soft, eager, easy to seduce. But Adana? She wasn't falling for any of his tricks. She seemed immune to his charm, and this drove Chima crazy. Day after day, he watched her. When she fetched water, when she walked through the market, even when she visited the farm with her aunt. Adana carried herself with a quiet strength that made her stand out. She didn't seem to care about anyone's opinion, least of all Chima's. She lived her life peacefully, and that only made her more attractive to him. Chima started finding excuses to talk to her. At first it was little things, offering to help carry her load, trying to make small talk, trying to get her attention in any way he could. But no matter what he did, Adana stayed polite but distant. Her calmness was beginning to bother him. One evening, Chima couldn't take it anymore. He decided that he needed to do more. He needed to take control of the situation. He couldn't let Adana continue to slip through his fingers. He had never failed with a woman before, and he wasn't about to start now. Chima knew that Adana often visited her aunt's small farm just outside the village, where they grew yams and vegetables, so he decided to wait for her there. It was a warm evening, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the fields. He leaned against a tree, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes focused on the path leading to the farm. Finally, he saw her. Adana was walking slowly, her steps steady and graceful. She was carrying a basket of yams on her head, her back straight, her face calm as usual. As she approached, Chima stepped forward, blocking her path. "Adana," he said, his voice deep and smooth, "you've been avoiding me." Adana raised an eyebrow and looked up at him, not breaking her calm expression. "I've been doing no such thing, Chima. I've just been busy." Her response irritated him. Chima wasn't used to being brushed off like this. He was used to women being excited to see him, not acting like he didn't matter. But he forced a smile, trying to keep his cool. "You're always so serious," he said, taking a step closer. "Why don't you let me walk with you? We could get to know each other better." Adana gave him a long look, her face still unreadable. For a moment, Chima thought she might actually agree, but then she shook her head, stepping around him. "I'm not interested, Chima," she said simply. Chima stood there, stunned. He wasn't sure if he was more shocked or angry. How could she just walk away from him like that? Nobody had ever said no to him like this. His pride felt bruised, but more than that, his obsession with Adana grew even stronger. He couldn't let her slip away so easily. No, she would be his, no matter what it took. As Adana walked away, Chima's eyes darkened. He made a promise to himself right there. He would have her, and she wouldn't be able to resist him for long. Chima's frustration grew as Adana continued to resist him. He was used to women falling for him quickly, but Adana wasn't like the others. The more she ignored his advances, the more obsessed he became. He knew he had to change his approach to win her over. This time he decided to be patient, to play the long game. Instead of showering her with attention like before, Chima pulled back. He stopped following her around and barely spoke to her when they crossed paths. It didn't take long for Adana to notice the change. She had expected him to keep trying, but now he seemed distant, almost uninterested. The shift in Chima's behavior worked. After days of watching him from a distance, Adana became curious. She approached him one evening as he sat outside his hut, sharpening his tools. "You've been quiet lately," she remarked, her tone calm but curious. Chima simply nodded, keeping his answers short and his face expressionless. He knew this would draw her in. After a few moments of silence, Chima suggested a walk, and Adana agreed, her guard lowering slightly. As they walked, Chima kept the conversation light, just enough to keep her comfortable. He wanted her to believe that he was a changed man, and that he was more than the charming, attention-seeking womanizer she had assumed. And slowly, it seemed to work. Chima had played his cards right, and now Adana's defenses were lowering. She no longer looked at him with suspicion, and her once guarded responses softened. Chima could sense that the moment he had been waiting for was near. His patience had paid off. One evening, as the sun was setting over the village, Chima decided it was time to act. He invited Adana to his hut, saying they could share a quiet evening together. Adana, now more comfortable around him, agreed. The air was still, and the village seemed almost too quiet as they made their way to his hut on the outskirts of Ukoja. Inside, the flickering light from a small oil lamp cast soft shadows on the walls. Chima offered her a seat and poured her some palm wine, his voice calm and soothing as they talked. Adana sipped the wine slowly, her eyes watching him carefully but no longer with the sharpness of before. Chima smiled inwardly, knowing that the moment was finally his. He moved closer, gently brushing his fingers against her hand, and began to speak in that low, seductive voice he was known for. "Adana," he said softly, "I've been thinking about you. You're different from the others, strong, independent." Adana smiled faintly, still relaxed, but Chima could see the effect his words were having. He leaned in a little closer, his voice now almost a whisper. "Do you know the difference between a man's manhood and a snake?" Adana's brows furrowed slightly, confused by the sudden question. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, Chima began to whistle. The sound was soft at first, barely noticeable, but it grew louder, filling the room with an eerie tune. Adana shifted in her seat, suddenly uneasy, but it was too late. From the shadows, a dark shape began to stir. Adana's eyes widened as she saw it. A snake, long and menacing, slithering out from Chima's trousers. The cold, smooth scales glistened in the dim light as the creature coiled around her. Chima watched, his face expressionless, as the snake prepared to deliver its deadly bite. But something was different this time. Adana, though terrified, suddenly reached into the folds of her wrapper and pulled out a small, white flute. Without a moment's hesitation, she blew into it, and the sound that came out was sharp, piercing, and filled the air with a strange energy. Chima's eyes widened in shock as the snake froze mid-strike. It hesitated, confused, its eyes now locked on Adana instead of its usual prey. She blew the flute again, and this time, the snake slowly turned away from her and slithered back toward Chima. Chima stumbled backward, fear flashing across his face for the first time. The snake, now under Adana's control, coiled around him, tightening its grip. Chima gasped, struggling for breath as the serpent constricted, its fangs hovering near his neck. How did you?" Chima stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Adana's face was calm, her eyes cold and steady. "You're not the only one who knows how to control a snake. It's time you paid for your wicked acts. Also, remember to say hi to Nkem." Before Chima could respond, the snake struck, sinking its fangs into his neck. The venom spread quickly, paralyzing him almost instantly. His body convulsed, his breathing shallow as the life drained out of him. Adana stood over him, her expression unreadable, as Chima's body went still. The snake loosened its grip and slithered away into the darkness, leaving Chima lifeless on the floor. Long before Adana ever set foot in Ukoja, her heart was heavy with grief and anger. The reason she had come to the village wasn't just to visit her aunt, it was to find answers. A few months earlier, she had lost her closest friend, Kem, in one of the mysterious deaths that had shaken the nearby villages. The pain of losing Nkem had cut deep, and Adana had made a vow to herself that she would find the person responsible. Nkem and Adana had grown up together, inseparable since childhood. Nkem was full of life, always laughing, always bright. They had shared everything, from their dreams to their deepest secrets. One evening, Nkem had told Adana she was seeing someone new, a man she described as tall, handsome, and charming, someone who made her feel like the only woman in the world. But Nkem never mentioned his name. She only said that this new man had something mysterious about him, something she couldn't quite explain. 2 weeks later, Nkem was found dead. Her body lay in the village square, cold and pale, with strange bite marks on her neck, just like the others. The village mourned her loss, but no one had answers. Adana was devastated, and her grief quickly turned to suspicion. Who was this man Nkem had been seeing? Why hadn't she revealed his name? And why did no one know anything about him? Adana couldn't let it go. She knew that her friend's death wasn't some random accident. It had to be connected to this mysterious man. Her instincts told her that something dark was at play. So she began asking questions, quietly, carefully. She wanted to know everything there was to know about the recent deaths, and soon enough, her search led her to Ukoja. When Adana arrived in Ukoja and laid eyes on Chima for the first time, she immediately suspected him. His looks, his charm, and the way he commanded attention, it all fit the description Nkem had given. Chima was the kind of man who could seduce any woman, and Adana's instincts told her that he was hiding something. But Adana knew she couldn't confront him directly. Chima was too careful, too clever. If she wanted to get to the bottom of the mystery, she had to be patient. She had to play his game, make him think she was just another woman drawn to his charm. And so she allowed him to approach her, to believe he was slowly winning her over. But all the while, Adana was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Before coming to Ukoja, Adana had sought the help of a powerful oracle in her home village. The deaths were too strange, too similar to be the work of an ordinary snake. The oracle was known for seeing beyond the physical world, for uncovering hidden truths, and Adana hoped she would have answers. The oracle had welcomed Adana into her small hut, filled with the smell of burning herbs and thick with the energy of the unseen. Adana explained everything. Nkem's mysterious death, the bite marks, the strange man her friend had mentioned. The oracle listened in silence, her eyes closed, as if she were seeing things far beyond the walls of her hut. Finally, the oracle opened her eyes and spoke. "There is a man," she said in a low, raspy voice, "whose manhood is not like that of ordinary men. He carries a snake within him, a serpent of seduction and death. It is his weapon, his curse. With it he lures women to his bed, and once they are under his spell, the snake strikes. The venom kills swiftly, leaving only the marks behind." Adana felt a chill run through her. She had suspected something dark, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. A snake man, able to charm women into their own deaths? It sounded impossible, but the deaths in Ukoja were too real, too frequent to ignore. "Is there any way to stop him?" Adana asked, her voice steady despite the fear growing inside her. The oracle nodded slowly. "There is a way, but it is dangerous. You must use his weapon against him. The snake responds to a specific sound, a whistle that he uses to summon it. But with the right tool, you can control the snake. I will give you a flute, a sacred instrument that can protect you. If you play it at the right moment, the snake will obey you, not him." The oracle handed Adana a small silver flute, no bigger than her hand. It looked simple, but Adana could feel the power within it. This was her only chance. "But be warned," the oracle continued. "He is clever. He will try to seduce you, to make you trust him. You must let him believe that he has won. Only then can you strike." With the flute in hand and a plan forming in her mind, Adana set off for Ukoja, ready to face the man she believed was behind her friend's death. From the moment she saw Chima, she knew she was right. He fit the description perfectly. The charm, the arrogance, the way he seemed to draw women in like flies to honey. She had to be careful. She couldn't let him see her true intentions. So she played along, allowing him to think he was getting closer, that she was falling for him, just like the others had. Little did Chima know that Adana was different. She wasn't just another victim. She was here for revenge, for justice. And with the oracle's flute, she had the power to make sure that Chima paid for what he had done to Nkem and to all the other women who had fallen under his deadly spell. By morning, the village of Ukoja was buzzing with whispers. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Chima, the man they had all admired, lay lifeless in the middle of the square, his body pale and still. Beside him, the snake, his deadly secret, lay coiled, its head severed and lifeless. Adana stood before the villagers, her face calm but her heart heavy. She had done what she came to do. She had avenged her friend Nkem and brought an end to the terror that had haunted the women of Ukoja for so long. The village was silent as she spoke, her voice steady and clear. "I am not just an ordinary visitor," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I came here with a mission, to find the man responsible for my friend Nkem's death, and to put an end to the killings. Chima, with all his charm and good looks, was not what he seemed. He was the cause of all the deaths in this village. He used his snake manhood, hidden inside him, to seduce and kill women. The villagers were stunned. They had never suspected Chima, the handsome, charming builder who seemed perfect in every way, of being the source of so much pain and misery. For years he had lived among them, gaining their trust, all while hiding the dark truth behind his smile. They had been blinded by his charm, by his fine looks, never imagining that he was a monster in disguise. Murmurs of disbelief spread through the crowd. Some of the women who had once giggled and blushed in his presence now stood in silence, their faces pale with shock. Others bowed their heads in shame, realizing how close they had come to falling victim to his deadly seduction. But now the truth was clear. Chima's reign of terror had come to an end, and the village was free from the darkness that had plagued it for so long. Years passed, and the story of Chima and his snake manhood became a legend in Ukoja. Mothers would tell the tale to their daughters, warning them of the dangers of falling for a man's charm without knowing his heart. The tale of Chima became a lesson for all, a reminder that not everything beautiful is good, and that sometimes danger hides behind the sweetest smiles. Adana's name became one of honor throughout the Ife kingdom. She was spoken of with reverence, her bravery and wisdom celebrated by the people. She had faced down a monster, outsmarted him, and saved countless women from suffering the same fate as her dear friend Nkem. Her name was whispered with pride by the women of Ukoja, and her story was passed down from generation to generation. As for Chima, his name was forgotten, buried in the dust of history. No one spoke of him anymore, except as a warning to those who might be tempted to use charm and deceit for evil. The villagers would remember the darkness he brought, but they would never honor his memory. The village of Ukoja thrived once again. The women were safe. The fear that had gripped the village for so long finally lifted. Life returned to normal, and the people of Ukoja found peace. But the lessons of the past were never forgotten. The memory of what had happened remained, a reminder of the strength and wisdom it took to uncover the truth and to protect those who were vulnerable.